Yeah, well, let's like jump right in. So in the last year or two, because we spoke about a year ago and you were opening up or getting ready to open up a center, it's now open. Uh, Tell us about this center and what's going on there.
Okay, so sure. We finally are back in the public eye again after being out because of the pandemic and a number of other things. And we have a nice new little center on the promenade or near the promenade in Santa Monica, which is sort of an open air mall with a lot of foot traffic. We haven't really had to rely on the foot traffic yet, though, because people that are interested now, the world has finally caught up with us, Jonathan. I mean, it was touch and go there for about 40 years. and and uh, people scoffed at it, made fun of it and everything, but just recently in the past 5 years or so, people are starting to open up to the idea of sound therapy and light therapy and different kinds of vibrational therapy. And so it's very exciting for us to have the world finally catch up with us and have enough people interested to where we've just been booked without having to do any advertising or anything. So
What do you think's
particularly in this
driving?
southern,
What do you think's
southern,
driving that change in people's mindset?
I think it's just, it takes 40 years for an idea to catch on. Isn't that what you've heard before? That's what I've heard. It takes 40 years after somebody invents something before is known by the public. And strangely enough, it's right about 40 years. And so it's exciting. The world's obviously getting more conscious, and there are more people talking about alternative means of health and therapy and that sort of thing. So I think all those things kind of coming together is really what's driving the interest in what I'm just calling vibrational therapy. It's hard for me to call it sound therapy because it involves light and sound and color and motion and aroma and all of the sensory mechanisms, because everything we do is kind of based on the ideas that you and I've talked about before about what we call sensory resonance, about helping a person get into a state of mind where it's like a coherent sensory experience where they're seeing the same thing that they're hearing, the same thing that they're feeling. And the brain gets overloaded with all that information. And that part of the brain that keeps up with all that stuff and tries to make sense out of everything, it gets what it wants, which is basically security, make sure there's no threat or anything like that. And it wants to make sure that everything adds up and makes sense and fits the picture. And so when you give it that, that part of the brain kind of gets out of the way. And immediately the consciousness starts rising up to those other higher thoughts of feelings of peace and well-being and connectedness, and that you're on the right track and that you can trust in fate and the universe and everything's going to be okay. But those kind of feelings are really hard to come about these days. And we believe our technology provides that. So it's a real honor now to have created this new center. We call it the Reality Management Center because we could come up with a better name for what we're doing. And we're really basically helping people learn how to manage their reality. And so it's very exciting for us to have this new place. Should I show some pictures of it or?
Yes, definitely.
Okay,
And
great.
I'm kind of curious, your thesis of sensory resonance, was this like did this occur to you 40 years ago in like a blast of consciousness? Did this develop over that 40 years that you've continued to evolve? What's the genesis of that?
Yeah, it developed during the time that I was in college, which was like the mid 60s. And it was just before that they made psychedelics illegal. And I was a chemistry major, so we were just making LSD 25 in the lab and just pure. And I have to admit, I loved it. I wanted to live in that space. I never saw anybody have a bad trip. I never had a bad trip until they made it illegal and people started cutting it with strychnine and all kinds of other hallucinogenic substances. And but I I really wanted to live there, so I started doing a lot of research on it, why people did it, how it worked, and that sort of thing. And it just kind of over a period of a number of years kind of came to me how to make all of this work. And there were some little few little episodes in there that really kind of jump started some of it. Like I can remember sitting on top of Ted Nugent's amplifier at a concert, and I had backstage tickets, and I remember feeling every nuance of his guitar in every cell of my body, and it just felt so good. And I just had never realized that music is meant to be felt as well as to be heard. And everybody knows how that works, because if you're next to a big, huge amplifier, you feel that bass, uh, in your whole body. But I was feeling every little nuance, even the higher frequencies in my body when I was sitting on that amplifier. So that night I ran home, and in those days, I mean, we didn't have LEDs and transducers and all that sort of thing. We had these little speakers. We go to Radio Shack and buy speakers. And so I ran to Radio Shack and I grabbed some subwoofers, and I took them home and I put them under my waterbed. And I thought, wow, that is just the coolest thing ever. But how can I recreate that visual experience? That was beyond me. I couldn't figure that out until one day I was driving down the road. I think I was riding with someone else, and I was sitting in the passenger seat with my eyes closed. And all of a sudden, I started tripping. I started getting amazing visuals. I couldn't believe it. And I opened my eyes and realized what was happening is that we were passing by a forest full of trees, where the trees were all planted sequentially in rows and lines, like they were all this an exact number of feet apart kind of thing. And the sun was going down on the other side of that, and it was shining through those trees. And so whenever we go past those trees, the light would actually flash in my eyes. And I couldn't believe how trippy that was. So after that, I went home, and like I said, in those days, we didn't have any LEDs or anything like that. So I went home and I got a pair of swim goggles from my brother. It was one of those big things that goes over your whole face like this. And I made some little fans that I glued in there that would spin like this over my eyes. And then I hooked a tube up to it so I could blow into it and spin those little fans and go out into the sunlight. And oh my God, it was mind blowing. And it was just as good, if not better, visuals than anything I ever got on LSD. So it was a number of little scenarios like that came up that kind of led me along the way to finally realizing that what that part of the brain really wants to get out of the way is it wants sensory coherence. It wants all of its sensory mechanisms to be getting the information at the same time. So we started building equipment back in those days. I think I built the first vibrasound wavetable in 1976. And we finally incorporated in 1984. I think we sold the first version of the wavetable in 1984. And it's so funny because somebody called me just recently from back in I think Alabama or something, because I'm from Georgia and I passed through there when I came to California, and I sold a table in Alabama. And that got sold to somebody else along the line, and whoever owned it called me recently and wanted to sell it. And I said, oh my gosh, that thing is, over 30 years old. And she says, oh no, it works great. So that was like a really good feeling, because we always tried to build our stuff bulletproof, because we were selling it all over the world. And I didn't want to have to hop a plane and go to South Africa or something like that to fix one of these things. So that was exciting to know that it has lasted this long. So anyway, like I said, it was a journey that was mostly during my college years, but I walked away from that with the realization that I wanted to devote my life to coming up with a way of achieving those kind of states without having to pop the pill, because there are certain compensatory lag times that come about when you pop the pill, where you feel great that at that moment, but the next day you kind of have to recover a little bit. because it seems to rob you of some of your own neuropeptides. And so we studied that and learned about how to um, get around that. And people have done this for years. I mean, the ancients used to dance around the fire. The Native Americans used to self-mutilate themselves, hang themselves up by their shoulders, and everything they could do to try to get that part of the brain just to get out of the way. And then transcendental meditation came along, and people started realizing that maybe we can maybe we can numb it out of the way with transcendental meditation, or quieten it down and let it get what it needs that way. And then drugs came along to just kind of get rid of it, just shoot right through the brain, and you're there in the experience without having had to have learned how you got there. It just throws you into the experience. And so this isn't really something new. Human beings have been trying to do this ever since they were around. Is how do you get to that next level, that transcendent level, where you really can change yourself and you really can grow and you really can start understanding that there's a much bigger picture going on than this day-to-day mundane stuff that we get caught up in all day. How do I escape that? And that's what I think psychedelics do. And it's so funny these days because we have all these youngsters coming in saying, "Hey, did you know there's a psychedelic revolution going on?" And I'm like, no, that was 60 years ago. And we have learned so much in all this time. We've learned how to do it without it. Now we call it technodelics instead of psychedelics.
Mm.
And we just we tie the senses up in a coherent experience to where they're seeing the same thing that they're hearing and feeling. And we use light and sound and color and aroma and tactile vibration and pulsed electronic fields and all kind of things like that to synchronize all of those senses together into a coherent experience. And when that happens and that part of the brain gets out of the way, um, like I said, it opens you up to all of those really good feelings that are going on in there. And
So it
as I
sounds
also
like,
mentioned, those are
it,
hard to come by.
yeah, it sounds like the network that you're attempting or that you are getting to go offline is the default mode network, that you're able to basically turn that off, which is a person's sense of self. And this is, psychedelics do this naturally, deep states of meditation do this. Um, is that what you understand is happening?
Yeah, that seems to be exactly it. And so another thing that I've noticed is that I can talk till I'm blue in the face about all this, doing workshops about how all this works and everything, and it just goes in one ear and kind of out the other a little bit. It doesn't really mean that whole much. However, if I can help a person get into a state of mind where they have an epiphany or an aha moment where their own higher self tells them these things instead of some other human being or some teacher or preacher telling them what's going on. When their higher self says it to them, it is so much more impactful. So that has become my goal now. And I say that that's the highest service that I can provide anybody, is to help them have an epiphany or an aha moment, because those kind of moments really do change people's lives. We, over the years, over this past 40 years, we've had technology that make tumors melt, and I've seen it happen. But what I've also seen happen is that if the person doesn't really understand why that happened to them, it just comes back. And so it's a waste of time and money to try to treat something like that without getting to the bottom of it. Whereas this, not only it doesn't really get to the bottom of it, it just makes it insignificant. It suddenly makes you have these realizations that, oh my gosh, all this stuff that I'm caught up with on a day-to-day basis means basically nothing. And the only thing that means anything is those important things: family and friends and consciousness and growth and that sort of thing. So that's what we're really trying to do with this new center, is help people get into a state of mind where they can have a moment like that. And it really does work, because when it does work, many times we've seen them like just leap off of the system and say, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, I don't mean to be rude, but I just got it. And they rush off to go home to sculpt something or paint something, or uh, some like scientist might get an idea in his head that solves some kind of equation that he's been looking for. And I get chill bumps all over me just telling you about it. It's pretty amazing, that feeling of oneness with the universe, and that everything's okay and you don't have to worry. You know, the universe has things under control. It has for, like, they know that it has for at least 12 to 13 billion years. And what I guess what one of the main things that I try to do is I try to convince people, especially the New Agers that think that God is nature. My response is that yes, that's true, but that's just the garden. Where's the gardener in that scenario? And once you realize that it's not only a garden, but there's a gardener behind it, and there's so much going on over there in that world that we don't even think about most of the time. But when you start thinking about it and realizing that world is really there all the time, it makes living in this world so much easier. And so those are some of the reasons that inspire me to make this kind of technology or technodelics available to everybody now.